All right, so the next part of this lesson has to do with the overview of the kidney, a very important organ that deals with the long-term regulation, controls the daily, weekly, and monthly regulation of blood pressure. So we're going to talk about review the anatomy of the kidney before we talk about how this all relates to hypertension and blood pressure control. So here is the kidney located in the individual, and it's going to receive blood from a renal artery and produces urine. Urine is going to drain from each kidney into a ureter, which carries urine to the urinary bladder here, and then you pee it out through the urethra. So within the kidney, the mouth and ureter flare to form the renal pelvis. So here's we have, looking out a little bit larger, here is the kidney itself. You have the renal pelvis. It's made up of the renal medulla and then the renal cortex. Within these, looking even closer, you see that we cut these, the renal medulla and the renal cortex. Cutting that now and looking even closer, you see that you have a nephron, and the cortical nephron and the cortex, and then you also have the rest of the nephron in the renal medulla. But you notice that you have the tubular system here that we'll get to, and also wrapped around that is the blood vessels. That's going to be very important as we go along in the rest of this lesson, understanding having a good image of the renal tubular system and also the capillaries that wrap around it. We're going to look at a video that gives an overview of the kidney, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. All right, so this is a video that talks about urine formation, the role of the kidney. Just note the first few seconds, there's no sound for the video, so don't adjust the sound. It'll come on in just a few seconds.
Urine is formed by three processes in the nephron, the functional part of the kidney. In glomerular filtration, the glomerulus filters water and certain dissolved substances from the plasma of the blood. This results in increased blood pressure, which forces the plasma-like fluid from the blood into Bowman's capsule and then into the tubules. The fluid or filtrate include many positive and negative ions of many elements. The filtrate does not.
Notice here in the video, this is the electrolytes, the sodium, potassium that's moving through. It's able to move through into the renal tubular system of the kidney, but the red blood cells are too big to move through.
Not have any proteins or red blood cells, which are too large to pass through the capillary membrane. In tubular reabsorption, substances are transported out of the tubules and back into the blood of the peritubular capillaries. Reabsorption takes place in the proximal tubule, loop of Henle, and distal tubule. The major part of reabsorption occurs in the proximal tubule. About 15% of water is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. The process is regulated by the hormones vasopressin and aldosterone. In tubular secretion, substances move from the plasma in the peritubular capillaries back into the filtrate in the renal tubules.
Keep this image in mind. Notice that you have the renal tubular system that's moving through. It's very important, and you also now have the capillaries. Oops. You also have the capillaries that are wrapped around. So make sure you have a good image of this, because we're going to talk a lot about the role of the renal tubular system and then its relationship with the capillary blood that's just around it as well.
The proximal tubule secretes creatinine and histamine, and the distal tubule and collecting duct secrete potassium into the filtrate. All the tubules actively secrete hydrogen ions to regulate the pH of the body fluids. The filtrate is now urine. Urine is about 95% water with a balanced urea, uric acid, amino acids, and electrolytes. The daily production is about 0.6 to 2.5 liters per day. Urine production below 30 milliliters per hour indicates possible kidney failure.
All right, so that was an overview of the kidney. And now we're going to talk more about, going to close up the role of this renal tubular system that they mentioned in the video. Here we have the nephron. Again, the nephron is going to be located here. You have the nephron, which is going to contain both the renal tubular system as well as the blood vessels around it, the capillary blood. This nephron is going to be made up of the glomerulus, which you have the flow of blood that comes in, the neck, the renal tubular system, the proximal arm, then you have the loop of Hindley, then you have the distal arm, and then it moves into the collecting duct before it moves into the bladder. So again, the nephron here of the kidney, we need to talk about the reabsorption and secretion, the difference between the two. Notice here you have the blood's going to come in. It's coming from the heart into the Bowman's capsule. What's happening here is the electrolytes are being filtered into the renal tubular system, into the neck of the nephron. And what you notice is you have the reabsorption of glucose and amino acids. Also, you're going to have secretion of potassium from the blood into the nephron. You also are going to have the reabsorption of sodium. It's important to understand the difference between the two. When you have reabsorption of a nutrient, in our case it's going to be sodium, it basically means the body is taking that back up. It's moving out of the renal tubular system and into the capillary blood. That's reabsorption. Secretion is when you're moving, in our case, potassium from the blood into the nephron. It's important to understand what has happened evolutionary-wise and why we do that. Hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, a lot of our diet was based on plants, which contained a lot of potassium but a low amount of sodium. So our body evolved in order to reabsorb as much of the sodium from our diet as possible, because hundreds of years ago we didn't have a lot of sodium in our diet. So whatever sodium we did eat, our body needed to reabsorb that and keep that for use. However, because we had a lot of fruits and vegetables in our diet that contained a lot of potassium, our body had excessive amount of potassium, so it evolved to get rid of excess potassium in our urine. However, you fast forward to today, our diet is high in sodium and low in potassium, but that process still occurs in the kidney, where we reabsorb sodium and we get rid of potassium. So again, you have the kidney has thousands of repeating units of nephrons shaped like bent tubes here. You notice here. Again, blood pressure forces fluid in past a filter. Again, you have the fluid goes through here. You notice that sodium in the distal arm is going to be reabsorbed. This arrow means it's being moved out of the renal tubular system and into the blood. Imagine those capillaries. Remember the capillary blood that was wrapped around the nephron here, the renal tubular system. So sodium is being taken back up into the capillary blood, whereas potassium is leaving the capillary blood and going to the renal tubular system to be excreted out. So again, it's going to be moved out of the renal tubular, the sodium is going to be removed out of the renal tubular cell, and potassium is going to be moved into it, and then it's going to be moved to the bladder before, and then you pee it out. So this is just a short summary of what is happening at the kidney. Make sure, again, the key takeaways from this is understanding that reabsorption is, in our case, sodium being taken back up into the body. So it's leaving the renal tubular cell and moving into the capillary blood, whereas secretion is, whereas potassium is leaving the blood and going into the renal tubular system. So you have reabsorption, the taking back up of something, and secretion is the removal of something. So this concludes, again, the kidneys. Have a good understanding of it, because now we're going to move on to the pathway, laying the foundation as to the reabsorption of sodium and the loss of potassium in the kidney, and how this can then contribute to hypertension.